The train lurched to a stop and Margaret Sinclair pressed her face to the frozen glass. Snow swirled so thick she couldn't see the platform. Her fingers trembled around the letter, the only proof that someone somewhere was supposed to want her. Silver Creek Station, last stop. She grabbed her worn suitcase and stepped into the blizzard. The cold hit her like a slap. She searched the platform, heart pounding. No one came. He promised he'd be here. Brown coat. Tall. 3 little girls. But the platform was empty. Just snow silence and the sinking feeling that she'd made the worst mistake of her life. If you want to know what happens next, subscribe to our channel and follow Margaret's journey to the very end. Comment below with the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels.
Catcher.
The station master was already closing the door when Margaret called out. "Please, is there anyone waiting?" "A man named Thornton." He turned, eyebrows raised. "Thornton. Elijah. Thornton." "Yes." Her voice cracked. "He was supposed to meet me." The old man looked her up and down, her thin coat, her worn boots, her city clothes completely wrong for Montana winter. Something like pity crossed his face. "Ma'am, ain't nobody coming in this storm. Thornton's place is 8 miles out. Road's buried." Margaret's stomach dropped. "But he knew I was arriving today. He sent the train fare himself." "Reckon the blizzard had other plans." She stood there, snow soaking through her boots, the letter crumpling in her frozen fingers. She'd sold everything she owned, given up her room in the boarding house, traveled 2,000 miles on a promise from a stranger, and now she was stranded. "There a hotel nearby?" she asked, already knowing she couldn't afford one. "Miller's Inn, 2 blocks east." He paused. "You got money?" She had exactly $3.40. Enough for 1 night, maybe 2 if she didn't eat. "I'll manage." He tipped his hat and disappeared inside, leaving her alone with the howling wind. Margaret walked. The snow came up to her knees in places, and her thin stockings were soaked through within minutes. Her teeth chattered so hard she thought they might crack. This was a mistake. Coming here was a mistake. But what choice did she have? Boston had nothing left for her. No family, no prospects. Just a cramped room above a laundry, and 14-hour days bent over a sewing machine until her fingers bled. When the letter arrived 3 months ago, she'd read it 17 times. "Dear Miss Sinclair, I am a widower with 3 young daughters in need of a mother's care. I offer a home, honest work, and respect. If you are willing, I will send train fare." Signed, Elijah Thornton. Not romantic, not flowery, but real. She'd written back the same day. Now, stumbling through a blizzard in a town she didn't know, she wondered if the letter had been real at all. Miller's Inn was a squat wooden building with frost on the windows and smoke curling from the chimney. Margaret pushed through the door and nearly collapsed from the sudden warmth. A woman behind the counter looked up. Round face, gray hair, pulled back, tight eyes, sharp as needles. "Lord have mercy, you look half dead." "I need a room." Margaret's voice came out as a whisper. $1 a night. Meals extra. Margaret counted out the coins with numb fingers. $3. 3 nights. Then she'd be on the street. The woman, Mrs. Miller, presumably watched her count with an expression Margaret couldn't read. "You the mail-order bride?" Margaret froze. "Excuse me." "Word travels fast in small towns, honey. Thornton's been telling folks for weeks. Got a woman coming from Boston, gonna help with the girls." She snorted. "Half the town's been placing bets on whether you'd actually show." Margaret's cheeks burned. "I'm here." "So I see." "Mrs. Miller slid a key across the counter. "Room 4, upstairs. I'll send up some soup." "Thank you." As Margaret turned toward the stairs, Mrs. Miller added, "Storm should clear by morning. Thornton's a decent man. Quiet, but decent. He'll come." Margaret didn't answer. She just climbed the stairs 1 frozen step at a time. She didn't sleep that night. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a window that rattled with every gust of wind. She sat wrapped in the thin blanket, watching the snow fall, thinking about the 3 little girls she'd never met. Rosalie, 10 years old. The letter said she was serious responsible. Too serious for her age, Thornton had written. She's been trying to mother her sisters since her mama passed. Violet, 7. Quiet. Don't take it personal if she won't talk. She ain't talked much since the funeral. And Lily, just 2 years old. She don't remember her mama at all. Maybe that's a mercy. 3 little girls who'd lost their mother, and Margaret was supposed to replace her. What was I thinking? She wasn't a mother. She'd never even held a baby. She knew how to sew dresses and darn socks and stretch a meal for 3 into a meal for 5. But mothering, that required something she wasn't sure she had. She pulled out the only photograph she owned, her mother taken 10 years ago, before the consumption ate her from the inside out. Before Margaret watched her waste away in a tiny room that smelled like blood and dying. "I don't know what I'm doing, Mama," she whispered. "But I couldn't stay there anymore. I just couldn't." The photograph didn't answer. Margaret pressed it to her chest and finally closed her eyes. Morning came gray and silent. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world buried in white. Margaret, dressed in her cleanest dress, blue wool patched at the elbows, but still decent, and went downstairs. Mrs. Miller was already at the counter, sliding a plate of biscuits toward her. "Eat. You look like a stiff wind could knock you over." Margaret sat and ate, too hungry for pride. The biscuits were warm and buttery, the best thing she'd tasted in months. "He's here," Mrs. Miller said. Margaret choked on her biscuit. "What?" "Thornton. Pulled up about 10 minutes ago. He's waiting outside." Margaret's heart slammed against her ribs. She stood so fast she nearly knocked over her chair. "Thank you. For everything." Mrs. Miller waved a hand. "Go on. And honey." She leaned closer. "Don't let the little ones scare you. They're just hurting. Same as him." Margaret nodded, grabbed her suitcase, and walked out into the cold. He was standing by a wagon, stamping snow off his boots. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair with threads of silver at the temples. His face was weathered hard, unreadable. He wore a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over gray-blue eyes. He looked up when she approached, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then he took off his hat. "Miss Sinclair, Mr. Thornton." He nodded once, slow. His jaw was tight. His eyes traveled over her, not appraising, just observing, like he was trying to solve a problem. "Apologies for yesterday. Storm came in faster than expected. Road was impassable." "I understand." Another pause. The silence stretched uncomfortable. "You eat?" he finally asked. "Yes." "Good. It's a long ride." He gestured toward the wagon. "I brought blankets. Gets cold up in the mountains." He reached for her suitcase, and their fingers brushed. His hands were rough, calloused, warm, despite the cold. Margaret climbed onto the wagon seat, her heart hammering. This is it. No going back now. They rode in silence for nearly an hour. The road wound through snow-covered pines, climbing steadily into the mountains. Margaret's breath came out in white puffs, and despite the blankets, she shivered. "You cold?" She startled at his voice. "I'm fine." "You're shaking." "I'm from Boston. I'm not used to this kind of winter." He grunted. "You'll learn." More silence. Margaret watched him from the corner of her eye, the set of his jaw, the way his hands held the reins steady and sure. He wasn't handsome in the classical sense, but there was something solid about him, something real. "Mr. Thornton." "Eli." She blinked. "Pardon." "Call me Eli. Mr. Thornton was my father." "Eli," she repeated. The name felt strange on her tongue. "I wanted to ask about your daughters." His hands tightened on the reins. Just slightly, but she noticed. What about them? What should I know before I meet them? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, Rose is the oldest. She's been running the house since her mama died. Thinks she's got to take care of everything and everyone. He paused. She ain't gonna make this easy for you. Margaret nodded. And Violet? Vi's fragile. Don't push her. She'll come around in her own time. Or she won't. And Lily? For the first time, something softened in his face. Just a flicker, but Margaret caught it. Lily's easy. She just wants someone to hold her. His voice dropped. She deserves a mama. They all do. Margaret's throat tightened. I'll do my best. He looked at her, then really looked, and something passed between them. Not warmth exactly, more like recognition. That's all I'm asking, he said. The Thornton Ranch came into view just as the sun broke through the clouds. It was bigger than Margaret expected, a 2-story log house with smoke rising from the chimney, a massive barn, fenced pastures buried in snow. Mountains rose behind it, white peaks touching the sky. But what Margaret noticed first were the 3 small figures standing on the porch, watching, waiting, still as statues. They've been asking about you, Eli said, all week. Excited. Scared. He stopped the wagon and climbed down, then reached up to help her. His hands closed around her waist, strong and careful, and she felt her cheeks flush. Thank you. He nodded and led her toward the house. The 3 girls didn't move. The oldest, Rosalie, stood in front, chin lifted, arms crossed. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's stubborn jaw. Her eyes were cold. Behind her, Violet clutched a rag doll to her chest, half hidden behind her sister. Wide brown eyes, pale face, trembling lip. And in the doorway, a woman Margaret didn't recognize held a squirming toddler with wild curls and a gap-toothed smile. This is Mrs. Brennan, Eli said. She's been helping with the girls. The woman, Martha Brennan, smiled warmly. Welcome, Miss Sinclair. Lord knows these babies need a steady hand. Thank you for watching them. My pleasure. She set Lily down, and the toddler immediately waddled toward Eli, arms outstretched. Papa, Papa, up. He scooped her up easily, and Lily buried her face in his neck. Something in Margaret's chest ached at the sight. Girls, Eli said. This is Miss Sinclair. She's going to be staying with us. Silence. Rosalie's eyes narrowed. For how long? That's not your concern, Rosie. It is if she's going to be telling us what to do. Rose. Mama's only been gone 2 years, and you're already replacing her. The words hit like stones. Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but Eli got there first. Nobody's replacing your mama. Miss Sinclair is here to help, that's all. We don't need help. Rose's voice cracked. I've been doing fine. You're 10 years old. You shouldn't have to do fine. Father and daughter stared at each other, and Margaret could see the pain in both their faces, the same pain wearing different masks. Finally, Rose turned and stormed into the house, slamming the door behind her. Violet flinched at the sound and pressed closer to the doorframe. Eli sighed. I'm sorry. She's hurting. Margaret finished. I understand. He looked at her, surprised. My mama died when I was her age, she said quietly. I remember what it felt like. Like the whole world was wrong and nobody could fix it. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness, he wasn't a soft man, but something adjacent to it. Come inside, he said. I'll show you your room. The house was warm and surprisingly clean, though Margaret could see signs of struggle everywhere. A pile of mending in the corner, weeks old. Dishes stacked haphazardly in the sink. A child's drawing pinned to the wall, crooked and half falling. A house trying to hold itself together. failing. Eli led her upstairs to a small bedroom at the end of the hall. Simple furnishings, a bed, a dresser, a wash basin, a window that looked out over the mountains. "It ain't much," he said. "It's perfect." He stood in the doorway awkward, like he didn't know what to do with his hands. "Supper's at 6. If you need anything—" He trailed off. "I'll be fine." He nodded and turned to leave, then stopped. "Miss Sinclair?" "Margaret," she said, "if I'm calling you Eli." A pause. Then, almost imperceptibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. "Margaret." He said it carefully, like he was testing the weight of it. "Thank you. For coming. I know it wasn't easy. Neither is this." "No." He agreed. "It ain't." And then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the hall. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands to her face. What have I gotten myself into? Supper was a disaster. Not the food Martha Brennan had left a pot of stew on the stove before leaving, and it was hearty and warm. But the silence around the table was suffocating. Eli sat at the head, eating steadily, saying nothing. Lily banged her spoon against her bowl, babbling happily. Violet pushed her food around without looking up, and Rose sat across from Margaret, glaring. "You're not our mother," she said suddenly. "Rose," Eli's voice was a warning. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You're being rude. I'm being honest." She turned to Margaret. "You came here for his money, didn't you? That's what mail-order brides do." Margaret set down her spoon. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go. Same as most folks who end up out west." "So you admit you're desperate." "Rose, that's enough." "Yes," Margaret said calmly. "I am desperate. I'm desperate for a home, for a family, for a chance to be useful to someone." She held Rose's gaze. "I'm not here to replace your mother. No one could do that. But I am here to help, whether you like it or not." Rose's lip trembled. For a moment, Margaret thought she might cry, but the girl just shoved back from the table and ran upstairs. The slam of her bedroom door echoed through the house. Eli exhaled. "I'm sorry. She's not usually—" "Yes, she is," Margaret said gently. "And she has every right to be." He looked at her, really looked, and something in his expression shifted. "You're not what I expected." "Is that good or bad?" "I don't know yet." Margaret almost smiled. "Fair enough." That night, Margaret lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house. The creak of settling wood, the whisper of wind against the windows, a child crying softly somewhere down the hall. She got up before she could think better of it. The crying was coming from Violet's room. Margaret pushed the door open and found the little girl huddled in her bed, clutching her rag doll, tears streaming down her face. "Violet, sweetheart, what's wrong?" The girl looked up startled. Her lip quivered. "I had a bad dream," she whispered. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed. "Do you want to tell me about it?" Violet shook her head. "That's okay. You don't have to." She hesitated, then gently brushed the hair from the girl's face. "Would you like me to stay until you fall asleep?" Violet's eyes widened. Then slowly she nodded. Margaret settled against the headboard. Violet curled up beside her, small and warm, still clutching her doll. "Mama used to sing to me," Violet whispered, "when I had bad dreams." Margaret's heart cracked. "I can try if you'd like." A pause. Then, "Okay." So Margaret sang an old lullaby. Her own mother used to sing, her voice soft and unsteady. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." By the time she finished, Violet was asleep. Margaret stayed anyway. She stayed until her own eyes grew heavy, until the house settled into silence, until the first gray light of dawn crept through the window. And somewhere in the night, a door creaked. She looked up to find Rose standing in the hallway watching. Their eyes met. Rose's expression was unreadable. Then she turned and walked back to her room. But she didn't slam the door. The next morning came too fast. Margaret woke with a crick in her neck, and Violet's small body still curled against her side. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all rushed back the train, the blizzard, the cold eyes of a 10-year-old girl who hated her on sight. She slipped out of bed, carefully tucking the blanket around Violet's shoulders. The little girl stirred, but didn't wake. Downstairs, the house was quiet. Gray light filtered through the frost-covered windows. Margaret found her way to the kitchen and stood there uncertain. She could cook. She'd been cooking since she was 8 years old. But everything here was different. The wood stove instead of gas. The unfamiliar layout, the sheer size of the pots and pans meant for feeding ranch hands. She'd figure it out. She had to. She was elbow-deep in flour attempting biscuits when footsteps sounded behind her. "What are you doing?" Rose stood in the doorway, arms crossed, hair still mussed from sleep. "Making breakfast." "We don't eat breakfast until Papa comes in from the barn." "Then it'll be ready when he does." Rose watched her for a long moment. Then she walked to the counter and looked into the bowl Margaret was mixing. "You're doing it wrong." Margaret paused. "Am I? Too much water. They'll be flat." "How much should I use?" Rose hesitated, clearly torn between helping and maintaining her hostility. Finally, she reached past Margaret and scooped out some of the wet dough. "Start over. Less water this time. And the stove needs more wood if you want it hot enough." Margaret nodded. "Thank you." Rose didn't respond. She just grabbed a log from the pile beside the stove and shoved it into the fire with more force than necessary. They worked in silence after that. Margaret mixing, Rose stoking the fire, neither of them speaking, but both of them present. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't even a truce. But it was something. The kitchen door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and the stamp of boots. Eli appeared, snow-dusting his shoulders, his cheeks red from the wind. He stopped when he saw them. "You're up early?" he said to Margaret. "Couldn't sleep." His eyes moved to Rose, then back to Margaret. Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or cautious hope. "Biscuits smell good." Rose helped. Rose shot Margaret a sharp look, but didn't contradict her. Eli hung his coat by the door. "I'll wash up. Vi and Lily awake." "Violet's still sleeping. I haven't checked on Lily." "I'll get them." He paused in the doorway. "Margaret." She looked up. "Thank you for staying with Vi last night." Her cheeks warmed. It was nothing. It wasn't nothing. His voice was quiet, rough. Not to her. Then he was gone, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Rose stared at the spot where her father had stood. Her expression was unreadable. "He doesn't say thank you," she said finally. "Not to anyone. Not since Mama died." Margaret didn't know what to say, so she just turned back to the biscuits and kept working. The days that followed were hard. Harder than Margaret had expected, and she'd expected plenty. The ranch was a world unto itself. 30 horses that needed feeding and watering, fences that needed mending, a house that needed cleaning, 3 children who needed attention, and 100 other tasks she didn't even know existed until they were thrust upon her. She burned the first 3 meals she attempted. The 4th was edible but tasteless. By the 5th, Rose had started silently correcting her mistakes, before they happened, adding salt when Margaret forgot pulling the bread from the oven before it blackened. They didn't talk about it. They didn't talk about much of anything. But Rose was there watching, judging, and occasionally helping despite herself. Violet remained a ghost. She drifted through the house like a shadow clutching her rag doll, rarely speaking. But at night, she'd appear at Margaret's door, eyes wide with silent pleading, and Margaret would let her crawl into bed beside her. They never discussed it in daylight. It was their secret. Lily was the only easy one. She'd taken to Margaret, immediately reaching for her whenever she was near, babbling in a language only she understood. "Mama," she said one morning, grabbing Margaret's skirt. The word hit like a blow. Margaret froze. Eli, who'd been pulling on his boots by the door, went still. "Lily," Rose said sharply. "That's not Mama. That's Miss Sinclair." Lily's face crumpled. "Mama?" "No." Rose's voice cracked. "Mama's gone. Remember, Mama's in heaven." The toddler started to cry, and Margaret's heart shattered into pieces. "It's all right," she said, kneeling down. "It's all right, sweetheart. I'm right here." She gathered Lily into her arms, and the little girl buried her face in Margaret's neck, sobbing. Rose turned away, but not before Margaret saw the tears streaming down her face. Eli stood frozen by the door. His jaw was clenched so tight Margaret could see the muscle jumping. "I'll be in the barn," he said roughly. And then he was gone. That night, after the children were in bed, Margaret found him on the porch, staring out at the snow-covered mountains. "Mind if I join you?" He didn't answer, which she took as permission. She wrapped her shawl tighter and sat on the bench beside him. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy. "She looks like her," Eli said finally. Margaret waited. "Lily. She's got Sarah's eyes, her smile." He exhaled, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Sometimes I look at her and I can't breathe." What was she like, Sarah? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Strong," he said. "Stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery. She could outride half my ranch hands and outcook the rest." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "She wasn't supposed to die. The doctor said everything was fine, said the baby was healthy, said—" He stopped. His hands clenched on his knees. "It happened fast. One minute she was holding Lily laughing about something. The next she was bleeding and there was nothing anyone could do." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I held her hand while she died. She made me promise to take care of the girls, to find them a mother." Margaret's throat tightened. "Is that why you wrote to me?" "Partly." He turned to look at her. "I can't give them what they need. I know horses, I know cattle, I know how to run a ranch, but I don't know how to braid hair, or dry tears, or sing lullabies." He paused. "Rose has been trying. Too hard. She's 10 years old and she's trying to be a grown woman because I couldn't—" His voice broke. Margaret reached out hesitant and placed her hand over his. He flinched but didn't pull away. "You're doing your best," she said. "That's all any of us can do." "My best isn't good enough." "Maybe it wasn't. But you asked for help." She squeezed his hand. "That takes strength too." He looked at her. In the moonlight, his gray eyes seemed almost silver. "You're not what I expected, Margaret Sinclair. You keep saying that, because it keeps being true." Something shifted between them. Not romance, not yet, but the beginning of understanding. The first fragile thread of trust. "I should get some sleep," Margaret said, standing. "Morning comes early." That it does. She was almost to the door when he spoke again. "Margaret." She turned. "Thank you. For listening." She nodded and went inside, her heart beating faster than it should. The following week brought trouble Margaret hadn't anticipated. It started with a visitor. She was hanging laundry frozen stiff within minutes in the bitter cold when the sound of hooves made her look up. A man on a black horse was riding toward the house, his coat too fine for a rancher, his posture too rigid for someone who spent his days in the saddle. Eli emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. His expression went hard the moment he saw the rider. Caldwell. The man dismounted with practiced ease. He was handsome in a cold way. Sharp features, slicked back hair, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thornton, good to see you." "Wish I could say the same." Margaret moved closer, staying near the porch, but within earshot. Caldwell's eyes found her, appraised her. Something in his gaze made her skin crawl. "This the mail-order bride I've been hearing about." He tipped his hat. "Victor Caldwell, ma'am. I own the bank in town. Margaret Sinclair. Pleasure. His smile sharpened. I hope Thornton's been honest with you about his situation. Eli stepped between them. State your business and get off my land. Just a friendly visit. Making sure you haven't forgotten our arrangement. I haven't forgotten anything. Good, because the next payment is due in 30 days, and if you can't make it... Caldwell spread his hands. Well, I'd hate to see these pretty little acres go to auction. Margaret's stomach dropped. She looked at Eli, saw the tension in his shoulders, the fury barely contained in his clenched fists. I'll have your money, Eli said through gritted teeth. I certainly hope so. For your sake. And your daughter's. Caldwell glanced toward the house where Rose had appeared in the window. It would be a shame if those sweet girls lost their home. Again. Eli lunged forward, but Margaret grabbed his arm. Don't, she whispered. He wants you to hit him. That's what he's waiting for. Eli's muscles were coiled tight, but he stopped. Caldwell laughed. Smart woman you've got there, Thornton. You should listen to her. He mounted his horse and gathered the reins. 30 days. I'll be counting. He rode off, leaving a trail of churned snow behind him. Eli stood rigid watching until Caldwell disappeared over the ridge. Then he turned and walked toward the barn without a word. Eli. Not now. The barn door slammed behind him. Margaret stood in the cold, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She didn't know the details, but she knew enough. The ranch was in debt. Caldwell owned that debt, and if Eli couldn't pay, they'd lose everything. That night she found Rose in the kitchen washing dishes with furious intensity. You heard? Margaret said. Rose didn't look up. I always hear. Papa thinks I don't, but I do. Margaret picked up a towel and started drying. How bad is it? Bad. Rose's voice was flat. Mama's medical bills. The funeral. A bad winter 2 years ago that killed half the herd. Papa borrowed from Caldwell to keep us going. Now Caldwell wants his money and we don't have it. What happens if he can't pay? Rose finally looked at her. Her eyes were too old for a 10-year-old. Caldwell takes the ranch. He's been wanting this land for years. That's why he gave Papa the loan in the first place. He knew Papa couldn't pay it back. Margaret's blood ran cold. That's evil. Rose laughed bitterly. Welcome to Silver Creek, Miss Sinclair. Folks here smile to your face and steal from you the minute you turn around. Not everyone. Enough of them. Rose went back to scrubbing, and Margaret dried in silence, her mind churning with questions she didn't have answers to. The blizzard came 3 days later. Margaret woke to a world of white. Snow fell so thick she couldn't see the barn from the window. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the walls, forcing its way through every crack and crevice. Eli had gone to the barn before dawn and hadn't returned. By noon, Margaret was pacing. He's fine, Rose said, though her voice wasn't steady. He knows what he's doing. It's been hours. Papa's survived worse. But Rose kept glancing at the window, her face pale. At 2 o'clock, the kitchen door burst open. Eli stumbled in, covered in snow, ice crusting his eyebrows and beard. Papa? Rose ran to him. I'm all right. Help me get these boots off, can't feel my feet. Margaret grabbed blankets while Rose tugged at her father's frozen laces. They got him to the fire, wrapped him up, forced hot coffee down his throat. The horses? Margaret asked. Safe. Barn's holding. He shivered violently. Gonna be a bad one. Might be snowed in for a week. Violet appeared at the top of the stairs, eyes wide. Lily was crying in her arms. Mama, Mama! Margaret's heart clenched. I'm coming, sweetheart. She spent the next hour with the little ones, calming them, feeding them, keeping them warm, while the storm raged outside. By evening, the house had taken on a siege mentality. Everyone huddled together, rationing firewood, listening to the wind scream. It was that night that Lily got sick. Margaret noticed it first, the flush on the toddler's cheeks, the glassy look in her eyes. She pressed a hand to Lily's forehead and felt the heat radiating off her. Eli. He looked up from stoking the fire. She's burning up. Eli crossed the room in 3 strides. He touched Lily's forehead and his face went white. God. No. It might just be a cold. Sarah had a fever too, the night before she... He couldn't finish. Margaret grabbed his arm. This isn't the same. Lily is going to be fine, but I need water, clean cloths, whatever medicine you have. He stared at her frozen. Eli, go. Something in her voice snapped him out of it. He nodded and disappeared. The next 12 hours were the longest of Margaret's life. She stayed by Lily's side through the night, bathing her forehead with cool water, singing the same lullaby over and over until her voice went hoarse. The fever spiked at midnight, and for one terrible moment, Margaret thought they were going to lose her. But Lily fought. She cried and thrashed and called for her mama, and Margaret held her through all of it, whispering promises she prayed she could keep. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. You're going to be all right. Eli sat in the corner, head in his hands, unable to watch, but unable to leave. Rose appeared sometime after 2, a cup of tea in her trembling hands. I thought you might need this. Margaret looked up. Rose's face was streaked with tears. Thank you. Rose sat down beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then so quietly, Margaret almost didn't hear it. Please don't let her die. Margaret reached out and took Rose's hand. I won't. They sat together through the darkest hours, 3 generations of grief and fear and desperate hope, while the storm raged outside and a little girl fought for her life. Dawn broke gray and silent. The storm had finally passed, and Lily's fever had broken. Margaret felt the change the moment it happened, the heat receding the small body, relaxing the breathing, evening out into natural sleep. She's going to be okay, Margaret whispered. Eli lifted his head. His eyes were red, his face haggard. You're sure? The fever's gone. She just needs rest now. He stood slowly like a man twice his age and crossed to the bed. He looked down at his daughter, and Margaret saw his throat work. I can't. His voice broke. If I'd lost her too. You didn't. He turned to Margaret. Something in his expression had shifted. The walls he kept so carefully in place had cracked, and she could see the raw, wounded man beneath. You saved her. I just did what needed doing. No. He stepped closer. You did what I couldn't. You stayed calm. You fought for her. He stopped, struggling for words. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to. He reached out hesitant and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek, rough and gentle at the same time. I do, he said quietly. And I will. Then he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Margaret with a racing heart and a sleeping child, and the dawning realization that somewhere along the way, this had stopped being about duty. It had become something else entirely. She found Rose still sitting in the corner, watching her with an expression Margaret couldn't read. You stayed all night, Rose said. Of course I did. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. Rose was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, smoothed her skirt, and walked toward the door. She paused at the threshold. Maybe, she said, not quite looking at Margaret. Maybe you're not as bad as I thought. And then she was gone. Margaret smiled despite her exhaustion. It wasn't much. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a start. Outside, the sun was rising over the mountains, turning the snow to gold. The storm was over. They'd survived. But as Margaret looked out the window at the frozen world beyond, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real storm hadn't even begun. Caldwell was still out there. The debt was still due. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice whispered that the worst was yet to come. She pushed the thought away and went to check on Lily. One crisis at a time. That's all she could manage. But deep down she knew. She knew that something dark was gathering on the horizon waiting for its moment. And when it came, she'd have to be ready. The days after Lily's recovery were quiet ones. Too quiet. Margaret caught herself jumping at every sound: the creak of the porch, the distant whinny of horses, the crunch of snow under boots that might or might not belong to Eli. They hadn't spoken about what happened in that room. The way he'd touched her face. The look in his eyes when he said he'd thank her. But something had shifted between them, subtle as the first crack in spring ice, and neither of them knew quite what to do with it. 2 weeks had passed since Caldwell's visit. 18 days until the payment was due. Margaret had started counting. She was in the kitchen kneading bread with more force than necessary when Martha Brennan arrived. The older woman stamped snow off her boots and unwrapped her scarf. Her face pinched with cold and something else. "You look troubled," Margaret said. "I am." Martha sat down heavily at the table. Word's spreading in town. Caldwell's been talking. Margaret's hands stilled on the dough. Talking about what? About Eli. About the debt. About how this ranch is going to be his by month's end. Martha's eyes were hard. He's not even pretending to be subtle anymore. He's already got buyers lined up for the horses. He can't do that. Eli still has time. Time, yes. Money, no. Martha shook her head. "I've known Eli Thornton since he was a boy. He's proud. Too proud. He won't ask for help and he won't accept charity. But if something doesn't change..." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Margaret wiped her hands on her apron and sat down across from Martha. "What do you know about Caldwell? Really know?" Martha was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Victor Caldwell came to Silver Creek 8 years ago with a pocket full of money and a smile that could charm a snake. Nobody knew where the money came from. Nobody asked. He bought the bank, started making loans to ranchers, farmers, anyone who needed cash." Her expression darkened. "At first, folks thought he was a godsend. Interest rates were fair, terms were reasonable, then people started defaulting. He changed the terms. Couldn't prove it, but somehow every loan he made ended up costing folks double what they expected, and when they couldn't pay..." Martha's hands tightened on the table. "He took everything. Land, livestock, homes. Half the property in this county belongs to Caldwell now. He just lets other folks work it while he collects the profits." Margaret felt sick. And no one stopped him. How he owns the bank. He's got lawyers in Helena. Sheriff Hartley's tried, but Caldwell's always one step ahead, always got his papers in order. Martha reached across the table and gripped Margaret's hand. "I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you because you need to understand what you're up against. This isn't just about money. Caldwell wants this land. He's wanted it for years. And he'll do whatever it takes to get it." "Why, there must be hundreds of acres around here. Why is he so fixated on Thornton's ranch?" Martha hesitated. "There's a spring on the property. Only fresh water source for miles. Whoever controls that spring controls every ranch in the valley." She paused. "Sarah, Eli's wife, she refused to sell him water rights. Told him to his face that she'd rather die than let him have a drop." Margaret's blood went cold. "And then she did die." "I'm not saying Caldwell had anything to do with it. Childbirth is dangerous, and sometimes..." Martha's voice trailed off. "But the timing was convenient. For him." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Margaret thought about Sarah Thornton fighting to protect her family's land until her last breath. She thought about Rose trying to be a mother at 10 years old, about Violet who barely spoke, about Lily who called Margaret Mama and didn't understand why everyone looked so sad when she did. She thought about Eli working himself to the bone every day, carrying a weight no one man should have to bear. "There has to be something we can do," Margaret said. "If there was, I'd have done it already." Martha stood and wrapped her scarf back around her neck. "Just be careful." Caldwell doesn't take kindly to obstacles, and right now you're standing between him and something he wants. After Martha left, Margaret stood at the window for a long time watching the snow fall. She'd come here looking for a family, for safety, for a place to belong. Instead, she'd walked into a war. That night she told Eli what Martha had said. He listened in silence, his face growing harder with every word. "You should leave," he said when she finished. "What? This isn't your fight. You didn't sign up for this." Margaret stared at him. "You think I'm going to run now? I think you'd be smart to." "Then I guess I'm not smart." She stepped closer. "Eli, I've spent my whole life running. Running from poverty, running from loneliness, running from anything that felt too hard or too painful." Her voice cracked. "I'm done running." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Caldwell's dangerous." "I know. He could hurt you, hurt the girls." "I know that too." "Then why would you stay?" Margaret looked at him. Really looked at the lines around his eyes, the silver in his hair, the exhaustion that seemed to live in his bones. And she said the truest thing she'd ever said. "Because you're the first person in my life who ever needed me, and I'm not going to let you down." Something broke open in his expression. For a moment she thought he might reach for her. Instead, he turned away, running a hand through his hair. "You're a stubborn woman, Margaret Sinclair." "I've been told." He almost smiled. Almost. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." But tomorrow wasn't the day the world caught fire. That came 3 days later. Margaret woke to screaming. Not human screaming horses. The high, terrified shrieks of animals in pain. She was out of bed before she was fully awake, running for the door in her nightgown. Eli was already on the porch, his face illuminated by something orange and flickering. The barn was on fire. "No!" The word tore out of her throat. "No, no, no!" Eli was already running. Margaret grabbed his arm. "The girls? Get them out of the house. Take them to Martha's. Go!" "Eli, I can't just... Go!" He shook off her hand and sprinted toward the inferno. Margaret ran back inside. Rose was already on the stairs. Violet behind her, Lily crying in her arms. "Get dressed, quickly. We're leaving." "What's happening?" Rose's voice was high with terror. "Where's Papa?" "He's handling it. We need to go, now." They were out the door in minutes. Margaret carried Lily. Rose dragged Violet by the hand, and they ran through the snow toward the Brennan homestead 2 miles away. Behind them, the orange glow painted the sky, and the sound of horses screaming echoed through the night. Margaret didn't look back. She couldn't. Martha was waiting at the door when they arrived, wrapped in a housecoat, her face pale. "I saw the flames. Is everyone—" "The girls are safe. Eli's still there." "Dear God. I have to go back." Martha grabbed her arm. "Margaret, you can't. I have to." She thrust Lily into Rose's arms. "Take care of your sisters." Rose's eyes were huge, terrified, but she nodded. Margaret ran. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs screamed and the cold bit through her thin nightgown like teeth. She ran until the Thornton Ranch came back into view, and then she stopped because she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The barn was fully engulfed. Flames licked at the night sky, sparks swirling upward like demonic fireflies. And in front of it, silhouetted against the inferno, Eli was leading horses out of the burning structure, one by one, disappearing into the smoke, again and again. "Eli." He didn't hear her. Or if he did, he didn't stop. She ran toward him, and that's when she saw them. 2 men on horseback at the edge of the property watching. One of them held a torch. Caldwell's men. Rage flooded through her, hot and pure. "You did this," she screamed at them. "You'll pay for this." One of them laughed. The other turned his horse and rode off into the darkness. Margaret didn't chase them. There was no point. Instead, she ran toward Eli, who had just emerged from the barn with another horse, this one wild-eyed and screaming. "Eli, you have to stop. The structure's going to collapse. There's more inside. 5 more. You'll die. I won't leave them." He plunged back into the smoke before she could stop him. Margaret looked around wildly. The water pump was frozen solid. The snow was too deep to move quickly. She had nothing except her own 2 hands. So she ran into the barn after him. The heat was overwhelming. The smoke blinded her instantly, tearing at her throat, stealing her breath. She dropped to her knees and crawled, calling Eli's name, her voice lost in the roar of flames. She found him near the back, struggling to open a stall door. The latch had warped from the heat, trapping a mare inside. "Together!" she shouted. He looked at her eyes, red and streaming, and for a moment she thought he might yell at her to leave. Instead, he just nodded. They pulled together, muscles straining wood, groaning. The latch gave with a shriek, and the mare bolted past them, nearly trampling them both. "How many more? 2!" They got the next horse out. Then the roof began to collapse. The beam came down so fast, Margaret barely registered it. 1 second Eli was beside her, the next, he was on the ground, pinned beneath a burning timber. He screamed. A sound Margaret would never forget. "Eli!" She grabbed the beam, ignoring the way the flames seared her palms. She pulled with everything she had, with strength she didn't know she possessed. The timber shifted just enough for Eli to drag himself free. "Can you walk?" I can't." She didn't wait for him to finish. She hooked her arm under his shoulders and half carried, half dragged him toward the barn door. The last horse followed them out, wild with panic. They collapsed in the snow 20 feet from the barn. Behind them, the structure groaned and finally mercifully caved in on itself. They lay there gasping, watching their livelihood burn. "Your hands," Eli said. His voice was barely a whisper. Margaret looked down. Her palms were blistered raw, weeping. "They'll heal." "Margaret, don't." She struggled to sit up. "Don't you dare thank me. Not now." He reached for her, his fingers wrapping around her wrist. "I wasn't going to thank you. I was going to say..." He coughed hard enough to shake his whole body. "I was going to say you're the bravest person I've ever met." Tears cut hot tracks down her soot-stained face. "You're an idiot, Eli Thornton, running into a burning barn. You ran in after me. Because you're an idiot. Someone had to save you." He laughed. It turned into another cough, then a groan of pain. His leg was twisted at an angle that made Margaret's stomach turn. "I need to get help," she said. "Can you make it to the house?" "I'll crawl if I have to." She helped him to his feet, foot really, since he couldn't put weight on the other leg. Together they limped toward the house, while behind them the last embers of the barn crackled and died. The next hours blurred together. Sheriff Hartley arrived with 2 deputies, alerted by the flames visible for miles. Martha came with the girls, her face white with fear. A doctor was summoned from town, a small, quiet man who set Eli's broken leg with grim efficiency. "You'll walk again," the doctor said. "But not for 6 weeks. Maybe more." Eli's jaw tightened. "I can't afford 6 weeks." "You don't have a choice." Margaret sat by his bedside, her hands bandaged her body, aching with exhaustion. The girls had finally fallen asleep, crowded together in Rose's bed because none of them wanted to be alone. "This was Caldwell," Margaret said. It wasn't a question. Eli nodded. "His men, Frank Dawson and whoever he hired." "Sheriff Hartley?" "Can't prove anything. Dawson's got alibis lined up, I'm sure. Caldwell's too smart to leave tracks." Eli closed his eyes. "The barn's gone, half the horses with it. Even if I could work, I couldn't make the payment now. He's won." "He hasn't won." "Margaret, be realistic." "No." She leaned forward, grabbed his hand. "I didn't run into that fire to watch you give up. We'll find another way." "There is no other way." "Then we'll make one." He opened his eyes, looked at her. really looked. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you care so much about a man you barely know and a family that isn't yours?" The words hit her somewhere deep. She took a breath. "Because you are mine," she said quietly. "You and those girls. Maybe not by blood, maybe not by law, but in every way that matters. You're mine, and I don't let go of what's mine." He stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he raised their joined hands and pressed them to his chest. "You're going to be the death of me, Margaret Sinclair." "Not if I can help it." The ghost of a smile crossed his face. Then exhaustion pulled him under and he slept. Margaret stayed by his side until dawn, watching him breathe, planning her next move. Caldwell thought he'd won. He thought the fire would break them. He was wrong. Morning brought visitors, not the ones Margaret expected. First came Tom Redfeather, Eli's oldest friend, a quiet man with steady hands who took one look at the burned-out barn and set to work clearing debris without a word. Then came the Hendersons from the next valley over. Then the O'Malleys. Then families Margaret had never met. Neighbors she didn't know existed. All of them arriving with tools and lumber and grim determination. "What is this?" Margaret asked Martha, who was directing traffic like a general commanding troops. "This," Martha said, "is what folks do when one of their own is hurting. Caldwell might own the bank, but he doesn't own Silver Creek. Not yet." By noon, there were 20 people working on the property. By evening, the framework for a new barn was taking shape. Sheriff Hartley arrived just before sunset, his expression grave. "Can I speak with Miss Sinclair?" Margaret led him inside where Eli was awake and propped up in bed, his face pale but alert. "I questioned Dawson," Hartley said. "He's got witnesses who claim he was in town all night, playing cards at the saloon. They're lying. Probably. But I can't prove it. Not yet." Hartley removed his hat. "But I've been doing some digging of my own, into Caldwell's business dealings. There's something not right about his books, discrepancies in the loan records, amounts that don't match, dates that don't add up." Eli frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if we can prove Caldwell's been altering documents, manipulating loan terms after they're signed, that's fraud. Federal crime. He'd lose everything." "How do we prove it?" "We'd need to see the original documents, the ones locked in his bank." Hartley paused. "I'm not suggesting anyone break any laws. I'm just saying, sometimes evidence has a way of coming to light." He left without another word. Margaret and Eli sat in silence. "He's giving us permission," Margaret said slowly, "to go after Caldwell. He's giving us a hint. That's not the same thing." "It's enough." She stood, her mind racing. "Caldwell has to have copies somewhere, or ledgers, something that shows what he's really doing." "Margaret, you can't." "I can and I will." She turned to face him. "You can't walk. You can barely sit up. But I'm not broken. And I'm not afraid of Victor Caldwell." "You should be." "Maybe. But I'm more afraid of losing this family. Losing you." The words slipped out before she could stop them. She saw Eli's expression shift, saw something raw and desperate flash in his eyes. "Margaret." "Don't." She backed toward the door. "Don't say anything. Not now. Just let me do this. Let me fight for us." She left before he could respond, before she could see whatever was in his face, before she could lose her nerve. Outside, the community was still working. The sun was setting. And somewhere out there, Victor Caldwell was celebrating a victory he hadn't actually won. Margaret squared her shoulders. She'd come to Montana with nothing but a letter and a hope. Now she had something worth fighting for. And God help anyone who got in her way. The plan came together in pieces over the next 3 days. Margaret had never broken a law in her life. She'd never stolen so much as a penny, never lied to anyone who mattered, never done anything her mother would have been ashamed of. But as she sat in Martha Brennan's kitchen, listening to Sheriff Hartley lay out what he knew about Caldwell's operation, she realized she was about to change that. "The bank closes at 4, Hartley said. "Caldwell leaves by past. His clerk, a boy named Peter, stays until 5 to balance the books. After that, the place is empty until morning." "You're telling me this because you want me to break in?" Hartley didn't blink. "I'm telling you this because I can't. I'm the law. If I step 1 foot in that building without a warrant, anything I find becomes useless in court." He paused. "But if a private citizen happened to discover evidence of fraud and brought it to my attention, then you could act." "Then I could act." Margaret looked at Martha, who nodded slowly. "I'll go with you," the older woman said. "No, you've got too much to lose. And you don't. I've got nothing except what I'm fighting for. That makes me the right person for this." Tom Redfeather, who'd been silent in the corner, finally spoke. "You'll need a distraction. Something to keep Caldwell occupied while you're inside." "What kind of distraction?" Tom smiled grimly. "Leave that to me." They moved that night. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and Silver Creek lay quiet under a blanket of fresh snow. Margaret walked through the back alleys, heart pounding so loud she was certain everyone in town could hear it. Her hands were still bandaged from the fire, but she'd regained enough movement to grip the tools Tom had given her: a thin piece of metal for the lock, a small lantern, and a knife she prayed she wouldn't need. She reached the back of the bank and pressed herself against the wall. Somewhere on the other side of town, Tom was supposed to be setting a small fire in one of Caldwell's empty warehouses. Nothing that would hurt anyone, just enough smoke to draw attention. She waited, counted her heartbeats, prayed. Then she heard it: distant shouts, the clang of the fire bell. The distraction had worked. Margaret slipped the metal into the lock and worked it the way Tom had shown her. It took 3 tries, her hands shaking, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold. Then the lock clicked open. She was in. The bank's back office was small, and cluttered desk, chair, filing cabinets, a safe she didn't have time or skill to open. The ledgers had to be here somewhere. Hartley had said Caldwell kept 2 sets of books, one for show, one with the real numbers. She found the first ledger in the desk drawer. Neat columns, pristine entries, everything proper. This was the fake one. The real one would be hidden. She searched the cabinets. Nothing. Under the desk. Nothing. Behind the portrait on the wall, a small compartment, and inside a leather-bound book with no label. Margaret's hands trembled as she opened it. The numbers didn't match. The interest rates in this book were double what the official ledger showed. Payment amounts were different. Dates had been changed. And in the margins, in Caldwell's own handwriting, were notes. Names of ranchers he'd targeted. Properties he intended to seize. A column labeled actual debt that was half of what people had been told they owed. It was all here. Everything. She was so absorbed in the evidence that she didn't hear the door open behind her. Well, well. Margaret's blood turned to ice. Victor Caldwell stood in the doorway, a pistol in his hand, and a smile on his face. "I had a feeling someone might try this eventually," he said. "Didn't expect it to be the mail-order bride." Margaret clutched the ledger to her chest. "It's over, Caldwell. The sheriff knows everything." "Does he?" Caldwell stepped closer. "And what exactly does he know? That I run a tight business? That I collect on debts people rightfully owe?" He gestured with the gun. "Put the book down." "No." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or amusement. "You're brave, I'll give you that. Stupid but brave." He cocked the pistol. "Put it down, Miss Sinclair. I won't ask again." Margaret's mind raced. She had seconds, maybe less. The gun was pointed at her chest. The door was behind Caldwell. There was no way out. Except, she hurled the lantern at his face. Caldwell ducked, cursing, and the gun went off. The shot went wide, shattering a window. Margaret didn't wait. She bolted for the door, the ledger still pressed against her body, and ran. She ran through alleys and side streets, her lungs burning, her legs screaming. She heard Caldwell shouting behind her, heard boots pounding on frozen ground. She didn't look back. She just ran. She burst into the sheriff's office 3 minutes later, gasping for breath, the ledger thrust toward Hartley like a weapon. "Proof," she managed. "Everything. He's coming." The door crashed open behind her. Caldwell stood there, wild-eyed, gun still in hand. "That woman is a thief," he snarled. "She broke into my property. I demand—" "You demand nothing." Hartley stepped forward, hand on his own pistol. "Put the gun down, Caldwell. She stole from me. She brought me evidence of fraud, federal fraud." Hartley's voice was iron. "And you just fired a weapon at an unarmed woman. I've got witnesses." He nodded toward the window where a crowd had gathered, drawn by the gunshot. "Half the town's watching. You want to add attempted murder to your charges?" Caldwell's face went pale. For the first time, Margaret saw fear in his eyes. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Yes, it is." Hartley motioned to his deputies. "Take him." They dragged Caldwell out in handcuffs, his protests echoing through the cold night air. Margaret stood in the middle of the office, trembling, the ledger still clutched to her chest. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Then her legs gave out and everything went dark. She woke in Martha's house wrapped in quilts, her burned hands rebandaged. Daylight streamed through the window. Someone was holding her hand. "You're awake." Rose, sitting by the bed, face-pale, eyes red-rimmed. "The ledger." "Sheriff Hartley has it. He's already sent word to the federal marshal in Helena." Rose's grip tightened. "Papa's been asking about you. He wouldn't stop asking until Martha promised to send word the minute you woke up." Margaret tried to sit up. Her whole body ached. "How long was I out?" "All night. The doctor said you collapsed from exhaustion. And your hands." Rose looked down at the bandages. "You hurt them again. Running." "I didn't have a choice." Rose was quiet for a moment. Then so softly, Margaret almost missed it. "You could have died." "I could have." "Why? Why would you risk that for us? You barely know us." Margaret looked at this fierce, stubborn, hurting girl. The girl who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who'd carried her family on 10-year-old shoulders, who'd resented Margaret from the moment she arrived. "Because that's what family does," Margaret said. "They fight for each other, even when it's hard, even when it hurts." Rose's lip trembled. "We're not your family." "You are to me." Something broke in Rose's expression. The wall she'd built so carefully, brick by brick, crumbled all at once. She threw herself forward, wrapping her arms around Margaret, and sobbed. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I'm sorry I was so mean. I was scared. I thought if I let you in, I'd lose Mama all over again." "I know, sweetheart. I know." Margaret held her tight, stroking her hair. "It's all right. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." They stayed like that for a long time, two broken people holding each other together. When Rose finally pulled back, wiping her eyes, she said something that made Margaret's heart stop. "Can I call you Ma?" Margaret's throat closed up. She couldn't speak. She just nodded. Rose smiled, really smiled for the first time since Margaret had known her, and stood. "I'll tell Papa you're awake. He's been driving everyone crazy." She left, and Margaret was alone with her tears. Ma. She'd called her Ma. She pressed her hands to her face and wept. Eli arrived an hour later, hobbling on a crutch Tom had fashioned for him, his face pale and drawn with worry. The moment he saw her, something in his expression shattered. "Don't you ever," he said, his voice rough, "scare me like that again." "I'm sorry. No." He crossed the room in 3 painful steps and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. "You don't get to apologize, not for saving us, not for risking everything." He took her hand, mindful of the bandages. "But you do have to promise me something." "What?" "Next time you decide to take on a corrupt banker with nothing but a lantern and stubbornness, You tell me first, so I can talk you out of it. Despite everything, she laughed. I can't promise that. I figured. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gentle as a whisper. Margaret Sinclair, you are the most infuriating, courageous, impossible woman I have ever met. Is that a compliment? It's the truth. He was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. I've been doing a lot of thinking, lying in bed useless while you fought my battles for me. Our battles. Our battles, he agreed. And I realized something. He looked up, met her eyes. I asked you to come here to be a mother to my girls. I didn't ask you to be anything to me. I thought it wouldn't be right. That Sarah had only been gone 2 years, and asking for more would be a betrayal. Margaret's heart hammered in her chest. Eli, let me finish, please. He took a breath. These past weeks, watching you with the girls, watching you fight for this family, watching you run into a burning barn to save me, I realized I was wrong. Sarah wouldn't want me to be alone forever. She'd want me to find someone who could love the girls the way she did. Who could love this land? Who could love... He faltered. Who could love me? Margaret couldn't breathe. I'm not a poet, Margaret. I'm not good with words. I work with my hands, and I don't know how to say pretty things. He squeezed her fingers. But I know this. I love you. I don't know when it happened or how. I just know that when I thought you might be hurt, when Rose came running to tell me you'd collapsed, I couldn't breathe. The world stopped. Tears slid down Margaret's cheeks. Eli, I know it's too soon. I know we barely know each other. But I also know that sometimes when something's right, you just feel it. In your bones. In your blood. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. This was Sarah's. She told me before she died that she wanted whoever came next to have it. I didn't understand then. I think I do now. He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring worn smooth with age. Margaret Sinclair, he said, his voice cracking. Will you marry me? Not because I need someone to raise my daughters. Not because I need help on the ranch, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Margaret stared at the ring, at this man who'd lost so much and still had the courage to love again. Yes, she whispered. Eli blinked. Yes. Yes, you stubborn, impossible man. Yes, I'll marry you. He kissed her then. It was clumsy and awkward, both of them crying, neither of them caring. When they finally broke apart, he pressed his forehead against hers. I should warn you, he murmured. The girls are outside the door. They've been listening the whole time. Right on cue, the door burst open. Lily Toddle in first, arms outstretched, followed by Violet clutching her rag doll, followed by Rose, who was trying very hard to look dignified and failing completely. She said yes, Rose shouted. I told you she'd say yes. Mama! Lily launched herself at Margaret, and suddenly the bed was full of children, all of them talking at once, all of them crying, all of them reaching for her. Margaret gathered them close, breathing in the scent of soap and snow and something indefinably theirs. Her family. Her girls. I love you, she whispered into their hair. All of you. So much. Violet, who'd barely spoken 10 words since Margaret arrived, looked up with solemn brown eyes. I made you something, she said softly. She held out a piece of paper folded in quarters. Margaret took it and opened it carefully. It was a drawing done in colored pencil. A house with smoke coming from the chimney, mountains in the background. And in front of the house, 5 figures holding hands, a tall man, a woman in a blue dress, and 3 little girls. At the bottom, in crooked letters, Violet had written, Our Family. Margaret pressed the drawing to her heart and cried. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Caldwell was transported to Helena in chains. The federal marshal found evidence of fraud spanning years. Dozens of ranchers cheated, hundreds of documents falsified. The trial would take months, but the outcome was certain. Victor Caldwell would never hurt anyone again. The money he'd stolen was returned to its rightful owners. Eli's debt, the real debt, not the inflated one, was paid off with funds recovered from Caldwell's accounts. The ranch was saved. And on a bright March morning with snow still on the ground, but sunlight warm on their faces, Margaret Sinclair became Margaret Thornton. The whole town came. The O'Malleys and the Hendersons, the shopkeepers from Silver Creek, the ranchers who'd rebuilt Eli's barn with their own hands. Martha Brennan stood at the front, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Tom Redfeather leaned against the wall, smiling his quiet smile. Rose walked Margaret down the aisle, chin high, eyes shining. Violet carried a basket of winter flowers. Lily, who didn't quite understand what was happening, kept shouting, "Ma!" at random intervals, making everyone laugh, and Eli. Eli stood at the altar, still leaning on his crutch, still pale from weeks of healing, but looking at Margaret like she was the only person in the world. Margaret, take the Elijah." The words flowed over her like water, like sunlight, like coming home. When Eli kissed her, the room erupted in cheers. Lily clapped her hands. Rose whistled through her teeth. Violet smiled so wide it transformed her whole face. And Margaret thought, this is what I was looking for. Not a husband, not safety. This messy, imperfect, beautiful family. This home. That night after the celebration had wound down and the guests had gone home, Margaret stood on the porch of the Thornton house, her house now, and watched the stars come out. Eli joined her, wrapping his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I was thinking about the letter. The one you sent me." She leaned into him. "You wrote that you needed someone to help with the girls. Someone willing to work hard. Someone who didn't expect romance." "I did write that. You were wrong, you know." He chuckled. "I've been wrong about a lot of things. But this time I'm glad you were." She turned to face him, cupping his jaw in her still healing hands. "I came here expecting nothing. I found everything." "Margaret Thornton," he murmured, testing the name. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." He kissed her under the stars, slow and sweet, and Margaret knew with absolute certainty that every hard road, every lonely night, every moment of doubt and fear had led her here. To this man. These children. This life. She'd come west looking for a place to belong. She'd found so much more. Inside the house, Lily started crying for her mama. Margaret smiled against Eli's lips. "Duty calls? It always does." They walked inside together, hand in hand, and Margaret scooped Lily into her arms. "I'm here, sweetheart. Mama's here." And for the first time in her life, the word felt true. Spring came slowly to Montana, the way all precious things do. Margaret woke one morning to a sound she hadn't heard in months: birdsong. She lay still in the bed she now shared with Eli, listening to the melody drifting through the window, and felt something loosen in her chest. Something that had been wound tight since the day she stepped off that train into a blizzard. Beside her, Eli stirred. His arm tightened around her waist, pulling her closer. "You're awake," he murmured against her hair. "Listening to the birds." Means the snow's finally breaking." She turned in his arms to face him. Even after 3 months of marriage, the sight of him first thing in the morning still made her heart skip. The silver in his hair. The lines around his eyes. The way he looked at her like she was something miraculous. "What?" he asked, a smile tugging at his lips. "Nothing. Just happy." He kissed her forehead. "Good. You deserve to be happy." A crash from downstairs made them both jump. "Lily," Rose's voice rang out. "Put that down, Mama. Lily's trying to eat the soap again." Margaret laughed and threw back the covers. "Duty calls." "Always does." Eli agreed, but he was smiling too. Downstairs, chaos reigned. Lily had indeed found the soap and was gnawing on it with determination. Rose was trying to wrestle it away while Violet watched from the tablespoon paused halfway to her mouth, a rare glimmer of amusement in her eyes. "Lily Grace Thornton," Margaret said in her best mother voice, "we do not eat soap." Lily looked up, grinned her gap-toothed grin and said, "Mama, yum." "It is not yum. Give it here." Lily clutched the soap tighter. "Mine? Everything's hers," Rose muttered. "The soap, my ribbons. Papa's boots." "She's two," Margaret said, finally extracting the soap from Lily's determined grip. "Everything's hers because she's discovering the world. She's discovering how to drive me crazy." Margaret hid her smile. 3 months ago, Rose would have said something like that with venom in her voice. Now it was just the normal exasperation of an older sister dealing with a toddler. Progress. Eli came downstairs fully dressed, moving easily now that his leg had healed. He scooped Lily up and tossed her in the air, making her shriek with delight. "Papa's little troublemaker," he said, catching her. "What did you do now?" "She tried to eat soap," Violet said softly. She'd been speaking more lately, not a lot, but more. Every word felt like a gift. "Soap's not for eating, baby girl." "Yum," Lily insisted. "Definitely not yum." Margaret watched them, her husband, her daughters, and felt that loosening in her chest again. This was what she'd come looking for. Not the fairy tale, not the romance novels, just this. Ordinary mornings, chaos and laughter, belonging. The new barn was finished now, built stronger than the old one with the help of neighbors who'd become friends. The horses that survived the fire had foaled over the winter, and the ranch was slowly rebuilding. It would take years to recover fully, but they had time. They had each other. That afternoon, Martha Brennan came to visit, bringing fresh bread and the latest gossip from town. She'd become a fixture in Margaret's life, part mother figure, part co-conspirator, all friend. "Caldwell's trial starts next month," Martha said, settling into a chair by the fire. "Word is he's trying to plea down, claiming he didn't know what his employees were doing." Margaret snorted. "That's ridiculous." "Course it is, but desperate men do desperate things." Martha's eyes twinkled. "Speaking of desperate men, how's yours doing?" "Eli's not desperate anymore." "No, I reckon he's not." Martha studied her for a moment. "You look different, you know, since I first met you." "Different how?" "Settled, like you finally stopped running." Margaret looked down at her hands. The burn scars had faded to silver lines barely visible unless you knew where to look. Like everything else she'd survived, they'd become part of her rather than defining her. "I didn't know I was running until I stopped," she admitted. "Most folks don't." Martha leaned forward. "Can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone?" Margaret nodded. 30 years ago, I was you. Came west as a mail-order bride. Young, scared, desperate for something better. Her voice softened. "My husband wasn't a good man, not like Eli. He drank. He had a temper. Some nights I'd lie awake wondering if I'd made it to morning." Margaret's heart clenched. "Martha, I'm not telling you this for pity. I'm telling you because I want you to understand something." She reached out and took Margaret's hand. "I survived. I outlived him. And then I built a life, a real life, on my own terms. Not the one I expected, but better." She squeezed Margaret's fingers. "You came here looking for safety, and you found love instead. Don't ever take that for granted." "I won't." Martha smiled and released her hand. "Good. Now, tell me about Rose. She's still being a hellion?" Margaret laughed. "Less of one every day." Rose had changed the most in the months since Caldwell's arrest. The wall she'd built around herself had crumbled piece by piece, revealing the child underneath, still stubborn, still fierce, but softer now. More willing to ask for help. More willing to let herself be loved. She'd started calling Margaret Ma consistently. Every time she said it, Margaret's heart grew a little fuller. And then there was the drawing. Violet had made it the day after the wedding, but Margaret hadn't found it until weeks later, tucked inside her Bible like a secret. 5 figures holding hands in front of a house just like the first one. But this time, there was a 6th figure, tiny, barely visible, nestled in the drawing Margaret's arms. When she'd asked Violet about it, the girl had just shrugged and said, "I dreamed it." Margaret hadn't thought much of it at the time. Children dreamed all sorts of things. But now, standing in her kitchen 3 months later, her hand pressed to her stomach, she thought about that drawing and felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Margaret," Eli appeared in the doorway. "You all right? You've been standing there for 10 minutes." She turned to him. Her husband, the father of her children, the man who'd given her everything she never knew she wanted. "I need to tell you something." His face went pale. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Nothing's wrong at all." She took a breath. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Eli stared at her. For one terrible moment she thought he might be upset. It was too soon. They were still recovering another mouth to feed. He crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled her into his arms. "You're sure?" His voice was rough-cracked. "The doctor confirmed it this morning. I wanted to wait until I was certain before—" He kissed her, deep and fierce and full of everything he couldn't put into words. When he pulled back, there were tears on his cheeks. "Margaret," he breathed. "A baby. Our baby." He laughed a sound that was half-sob. "I never thought after Sarah, I didn't think I'd ever—" "Neither did I." She cupped his face in her hands. "But here we are." "Here we are," he repeated. He pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you. Have I told you that today?" "Not yet." "I love you. I love you so much it scares me." "It scares me too." She smiled through her tears. "But I've learned that the best things usually do." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, crying and laughing, until the sound of small feet thundering down the stairs broke the moment. "Ma, Papa!" Rose burst in, Violet and Lily trailing behind. "What's going on? Why are you crying?" Eli wiped his eyes and turned to face his daughters. His daughters, Margaret thought, and soon hers legally too. They'd started the adoption paperwork last month. "Girls," Eli said, his voice thick, "your ma and I have something to tell you." Rose's eyes went wide. "What kind of something?" Margaret knelt down, so she was eye level with them. Even Lily, sensing the importance of the moment, had gone quiet in Violet's arms. "You know how you 3 are the best sisters in the whole world." Rose narrowed her eyes. "What's happening?" "Well," Margaret said, "in about 7 months, you're going to have a chance to prove it, because you're going to have a new baby brother or sister." Silence. Then Rose exploded. "A baby. A real baby. We're getting a baby." She spun around to Violet. "Vi, did you hear that? A baby." Violet's eyes had gone huge. Slowly, a smile spread across her face, the biggest smile Margaret had ever seen from her. "I knew it," she whispered. Margaret blinked. "What?" "I dreamed it. Remember the drawing?" Violet looked at Margaret with those solemn brown eyes that saw too much. "I dreamed there was a baby. I didn't know when, but I knew." Margaret pulled her close. "You're something special, Violet Thornton." "Baby," Lily said, confused. She patted Margaret's stomach. "Baby in there." "Yes, sweetheart, baby in there." Lily considered this for a moment. Then she grinned. "Mine?" Everyone laughed, and the kitchen filled with noise and joy and all the beautiful chaos of family. That night, after the girls were in bed, Margaret sat on the porch, wrapped in a quilt, watching the stars come out. The snow was almost gone now. In its place, she could see the first hints of green grass pushing through the mud buds forming on the trees. New life everywhere she looked. Eli joined her, lowering himself into the chair beside her. "Penny for your thoughts." She smiled. I was thinking about the woman who got off that train 6 months ago. How scared she was. How alone. She's not alone anymore. No, she's not. Margaret reached for his hand. You know what's strange? All my life I was looking for safety, for security. That's what I thought I needed. A place where nothing bad could happen. And now I know that's not how it works. Bad things happen. Fires, storms, evil men who try to take what isn't theirs. She squeezed his fingers. But good things happen too. Love, family, people who show up when you need them. She turned to look at him. I stopped looking for safety. I started looking for something worth fighting for. And I found it. Eli raised her hand to his lips. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Margaret Thornton. Likewise, Mr. Thornton. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. I've been thinking, Eli said eventually, about the spring, about what comes next. What about it? I want to do something, for the town, for all the people who helped us when Caldwell... He paused. There are women out there like you were, alone, desperate, answering letters from strangers because it's the only chance they have. Margaret turned to face him. What are you suggesting? The old Miller property, the one Caldwell was going to seize before the marshal stopped him. Mrs. Miller can't work it alone, but she won't sell. He met her eyes. I talked to her. She's willing to let us use part of the land, build something there. Build what? A place. For women who need somewhere to go, somewhere safe while they figure out their next step. His voice roughened. I know it won't fix everything. I know there are more Caldwells out there, more women getting letters from men who don't mean them well. But if we could help even a few... Margaret stared at him. This man. This stubborn, quiet, impossible man who'd lost so much and still wanted to give more. Yes, she said. Yes. Yes, we'll do it. We'll build it. She was crying again. She'd cried more in the past 6 months than in the entire rest of her life combined, but she didn't care. We'll call it Sarah's house, for your wife, for all the women who deserved better. Eli's breath caught. Margaret, she protected this land until her last breath. She made you promise to take care of the girls. Margaret cupped his face. This is how we honor her. Not by forgetting, but by carrying forward. By making sure other women have what she wanted for her daughters. A safe place. A real home. He kissed her, then long and slow, and Margaret felt the last broken piece of her heart click into place. They spent the next months planning. The baby grew inside Margaret, making her sick in the mornings and ravenous by afternoon. The girls took turns talking to her belly, telling their future sibling stories about the ranch, about the horses, about the ma who'd come from far away and stayed forever. Rose appointed herself official protector of Margaret's comfort, bringing her tea and extra blankets and glaring at anyone who made too much noise when Margaret was resting. Violet started drawing more pictures of the baby of the house of the garden they were planting outside. And Lily, who didn't quite understand what was happening, but knew it was important, insisted on kissing Margaret's stomach every night before bed. Baby sleep good, she'd say solemnly. Lily, tell baby. Tom Redfeather came by weekly to help with the construction on the Miller property. Martha coordinated volunteers from town women, mostly who understood why this mattered. Sheriff Hartley donated lumber from Caldwell's seized assets, a small justice that felt right. And slowly, Sarah's house took shape. Summer arrived with a vengeance hot and bright and full of promise. Margaret, now 7 months along and unable to see her feet supervised from a rocking chair while others did the heavy lifting. She hated feeling useless, but Eli had put his foot down. You've done enough fighting, he said. Let someone else take a turn. I'm pregnant, not dying. You're carrying our child. That's the most important work there is. She couldn't argue with that. The baby came in August on a night so hot the windows had to stay open to catch any hint of breeze. Martha served as midwife with Eli pacing the hallway, and the girls huddled at the top of the stairs, refusing to sleep until they heard the cry. It was a boy. Margaret held him in her arms, exhausted and elated, and counted his fingers and toes. All present. All perfect. He had Eli's dark hair and her green eyes, and when he opened his mouth to wail, Rose cheered so loud it woke half the valley. "What are we calling him?" Eli asked, perching on the edge of the bed, reaching out one finger for the baby to grip. Margaret looked down at her son. At this miracle, she never expected this gift she hadn't known she wanted. "Samuel," she said, "after my father." Eli smiled. "Samuel Thornton, I like it." "Samuel James Thornton," Margaret amended. "James for yours." His eyes went bright. "Margaret, family," she said simply. "That's what this is, old and new woven together." He leaned down and kissed her, then kissed Samuel's forehead. "Welcome to the world, little man," he murmured. "You've got a lot of sisters who've been waiting for you." As if on cue, the door burst open, and 3 girls tumbled in, unable to wait a second longer. Let me see," Rose demanded. "Quiet," Violet whispered. "Baby's sleeping." "Mine," Lily declared, reaching for Samuel with grabby hands. Margaret laughed even though it hurt. "He's everyone's, but you have to be gentle." She helped Lily touch Samuel's tiny hand. The toddler's eyes went wide with wonder. "Soft," she whispered. "Baby soft. Very soft, and very new. We have to take care of him, all of us together." Rose leaned in, studying her new brother with critical eyes. Then she nodded, satisfied. "He'll do," she announced. "High praise," Eli said dryly. "I'm serious. He looks strong. He's got Thornton eyes." Rose looked at Margaret. "And your chin. That's good. Thornton chins are weak." "I beg your pardon?" Eli said. Everyone laughed, and the room filled with the sound of family, messy, imperfect, beautiful family. Sarah's house opened in October, when the leaves were turning gold, and the first hint of winter crept into the air. Margaret stood at the entrance, Samuel in her arms. Eli beside her. The girls arranged in a row from tallest to smallest, and watched as the first resident walked through the door. Her name was Catherine. She was 19, came from Pennsylvania, answered a letter from a man who turned out to be married. She'd arrived in Montana with nothing. Found herself stranded, and someone told her about the house with the green door where women could stay until they found their feet. "Thank you," she whispered to Margaret, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for being here." Margaret thought about her own arrival. The empty platform. The blizzard. The fear that she'd made the worst mistake of her life. "Thank you for being brave enough to ask for help," she said. "That's the hardest part." Over the following months, more women came. Some stayed a few days, some a few weeks. A few put down roots in Silver Creek, finding work, finding community, finding the kind of life they'd been searching for all along. Margaret helped where she could between caring for Samuel and managing the ranch and loving her family. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough, not while women were still being lured west with false promises, but it was something. And something she'd learned was how change began. Winter came again, gentler this time. Or maybe it just felt that way because Margaret wasn't facing it alone. On Christmas Eve, the whole family gathered in the Thornton kitchen. Margaret and Eli, the girls, Samuel in his cradle, Martha by the fire, Tom in the corner. Sheriff Hartley stopping by with gifts for the children. The house smelled of pine and cinnamon, and carols drifted through the air. Margaret stood by the window, watching snow fall on the land she now called home. So much had changed in a year. She'd arrived as a stranger, desperate and afraid. Now she was a wife, a mother, a pillar of the community. She had a husband who loved her children, who needed her friends who supported her. She had everything she never knew she wanted. Rose appeared at her elbow, cup of cider in hand. "What are you thinking about, Ma?" Ma. Even now the word made Margaret's heart swell. "I was thinking about how lucky I am." Rose snorted. "Luck had nothing to do with it. You fought for this. We all did. Margaret looked at her eldest daughter, fierce, stubborn, growing up too fast, and yet finally letting herself be a child again. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. Nobody listened. Rose grinned. Now they have to. Margaret laughed and pulled her into a hug. Across the room, Eli caught her eye. He smiled that rare, full smile that still made her breath catch. In the cradle, Samuel stirred. Lily immediately abandoned her toys to check on him, her favorite job since he was born. Violet sat by the fire with her sketchbook, drawing something Margaret couldn't see. This, Margaret thought. This is what I was searching for. Not a house, not security, not even love exactly. Connection, purpose, a place where I matter, a place where I belong. She'd come west on a train with a letter and a prayer. She'd found a family, a home, and a reason to stay. Outside, the snow kept falling soft and steady, blanketing the land in white. Inside, the fire crackled, the children laughed, and Margaret Thornton held her family close. She had arrived as a stranger, lost and looking for something she couldn't name. She had stayed because she finally found it. Not a groom, not a rescue, not a fairy tale. Just love, imperfect, hard-won, and absolutely completely real. And that in the end was more than enough. It was everything.